Week number 1 was full of fantasy football landmines where we're talking about the wide receiver position. I'm talking Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, A.J. Brown, and Jamar Chase, who were all held under 6 fantasy points, prompting fantasy managers to basically question their sanity. Your RotoBaller Week 2 starts and sits at the wide receiver position. Well, we're here to provide a little bit of a fantasy football wellness check. Now let's kick things off with those starts, and let's talk about Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets as he takes on the Buffalo Bills. Garrett Wilson, he proved to be a baller with what many, including myself, deemed a difficult matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. In Wilson's first game with Justin Fields, the duo, they didn't care about the matchup. Joey Porter Jr., Darius Slade, Jalen Ramsey, it did not matter. Looking at Wilson's utilization, it is easy to see how Wilson was able to produce 22.5 fantasy points. Wilson had 3.8 yards per route run rate while participating in 100% of the routes, earning a 13.57 yards per reception while accounting for 43% of the target share. Wilson caught 7 of 9 targets for 95 yards while providing 55% of the Jets' air yards and an average depth of target of 9.6 yards. New York also moved Wilson around the formations there, running him 37% of the time out of the slot. Fields was not only looking at Wilson often, but he was looking in his direction early as Wilson's first read target share was 36.4%, a 5% improvement from his first read target share from a season ago. On Sunday night, the world witnessed the Buffalo Bills secondary get absolutely lambasted by Zay Flowers, who gained 143 receiving yards on just 7 receptions, thanks to the 5.3 yards of separation he averaged from the nearest defender throughout the contest. It's only 1 week, but Buffalo is currently allowing 42.6 fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, and at that rate, I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson this week. Another wide receiver that I'm putting in my starting lineup, how about Jeudy of the Cleveland Browns as they take on the Baltimore Ravens? Like the Buffalo Bills, the Ravens secondary was suspect in that Week 1 contest. They allowed Bills receivers to produce 50.8 fantasy points thanks to 20 receptions and 240 yards in which they yielded. Jeudy has been watching film and thinking he is going to eat well this week. Judy's Week 1 performance was somewhat underwhelming considering the matchup as he caught just 5 passes out of 8 targets for 66 yards. Now, despite that low receiving total, some intriguing data suggests the best is yet to come. Against the Bengals, Jeudy accounted for a 22.8% of the Browns' receiving percentage, earning a first read target share of 28% and a yards per target of 8.25 and a yards per reception mark of 13.2. While Cedric Tillman has benefited the most since the Amari Cooper trade last season, Jerry Jeudy has been productive in his own right, averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game, 75.6 receiving yards, 8 targets per contest in the 5 full games the Browns' top receivers have suited up together. Last season against the Ravens secondary, Jeudy had 11 receptions on 21 targets, averaging 12.9 yards per reception. And another start this week, how about a good old classic wide receiver, Stefon Diggs, as the New England Patriots head down to South Beach to take on the Miami Dolphins. Not only did the Dolphins secondary concede 33.4 fantasy points to Colts receivers, I watched Michael Pittman Jr. Yes, Michael Pittman Jr. haul in 6 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown on his way to a 20-point fantasy outing against this Dolphins defense just a week ago. So fantasy managers should be basically looking to attack Miami's secondary like opposing quarterbacks and start everyone they have who faces this team. New England is slowly easing Diggs back as he recovers from that ACL injury. Last week against the Raiders, Diggs, he only played 41% of the snaps, and despite that limited action, Diggs still accounted for 15.3% of a target share and a 19.9% team receiving market share, and it was Drake May's first read 20.7% of the time. Now expect those numbers to increase this week, as too should the production. Against the Raiders, Diggs averaged 9.5 yards per reception, grabbing 6 balls for 57 yards. As for the wide receivers that I'm fading, I already said his name. If you say it 3 times, it's going to come. So I'm going to say Michael Pittman, Michael Pittman, Michael Pittman. Yes, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. He is a sit against the Denver Broncos. Hey, congratulations, Pittman, on a solid Week 1 performance. Your reward, it is a date with Patrick Surtain II and a spot on fantasy benches everywhere. Last week, Denver held Calvin Ridley and the Tennessee Titans receivers to just 48 yards receiving on 7 receptions, limiting that fantasy output to just 12.7 fantasy points. If you want to bet on Pittman having a breakout season, hey, all the power to you. But the numbers suggest this isn't the week to put your faith in Pittman or this Colts passing game. Last season, the most receiving yards that Surtain allowed in a single contest while in coverage was 45 yards against the Bengals. Against Tennessee, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year did not allow a single reception. If Surtain in coverage wasn't enough to caution fantasy managers, Denver's defense, they got to Cam Ward 6 times, picking up where they left off last season, where they led the league with 64 sacks. Hey, I don't make up the rules, but I have a feeling that Daniel Jones is not going to have a whole lot of time to get that ball out there. Another sit this week is Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints as they take on the San Francisco 49ers. Yes, San Francisco gave a big game to Jackson Smith-Njigba last week as the Seahawks receiver finished with 9 receptions for 124 receiving yards. However, no other Seahawks receiver would finish with more than 15 receiving yards, making Chris Olave a risky start at best this week, even coming off a 13-target outing against the Cardinals in week number 1. Fantasy football is a matchup-based game. There are better receivers out there with better matchups than what Olave is, who's facing a secondary that allowed just 22.9 fantasy points last weekend. To make matters worse, Nick Bosa looks like he is again healthy and will be hunting for Spencer Rattler, who completed just 59% of his 46 passing attempts that led to just 214 yards. With all due respect, the Cardinals, their defense, there isn't a single pass rusher on that unit that is at the same level as a healthy Bosa. And my final sit of the week, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as they take on the Houston Texans. If you're looking for Mike Evans to have a big week this week, you may want to turn the video off right now because it's not going to happen. Now it's still early here, but Evans' streak of 11 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons may be in jeopardy after the Falcons held him to 51 yards on 5 receptions. And now he has to head into Houston on Monday Night Football for a matchup that will feature Evans against one of the premier corners in today's game, Derek Stingley Jr. In Sunday's contest, Stingley, he got slightly banged up, so you're going to want to watch the practice reports throughout the week because he was clearly wincing throughout the game. But he did return, and he was a big part of the reason why Devonta Adams' production was limited. Since 2023, Stingley ranks first in passer rating allowed at 50.8, a completion percentage allowed at 48.3%, and has a forced incompletion or created an interception on 37 occasions. In 2024, Stingley was targeted 95 times, finishing with 23 breakups and interceptions combined, allowing just a 45.3% completion rate. Again, fantasy football is about the numbers, and it is about eliminating risks whenever possible. Evans, he's good enough to produce any given week, but this week's matchup is not in his favor. If you want favor, make sure to head over to RotoBaller.com for all the latest news and analysis, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. You know what? We'll see you next time.